So welcome to today's Ferry Fare proposal. My name is Noah Crocker, and I am staff of the Transportation Commission. I will be moderating this webinar this afternoon. Today we'll be providing a presentation regarding the Washington State Ferry Fares for fiscal years 16 and 17. As we go through this presentation, if you have questions or comments, you can type them into the chat message box in the right-hand corner of your screen. If you're on a tablet or smartphone, you will need to press the chat icon and then type in text your question and then submit. All questions and comments will be addressed at the conclusion of this presentation. Additionally, we'll have a short survey for you to complete on the webinar platform. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted to our website for future viewing, and it will also be posted to YouTube. During the presentation, we will turn off the cameras to allow focus on the presenter. And before we get started, I'd like to introduce Chairman Commissioner Ann Haley for some brief opening remarks.
Welcome, and thank you very much for taking the time to participate in this webinar in regard to the Washington State Ferry Fare proposals. We hope you find today's presentation informative, and we hope it addresses your questions about the Washington Ferry Fare proposal. Today we have Director of Planning of the Washington State Ferries, Ray Deerdorf, to discuss the Ferry Fare proposal. Before we go into this presentation, I want to thank you for your patience as we work with this new technology and are able to connect commissioners and you from around the state. Today we have Commissioner Tortorelli from Spokane, Commissioner Jerry Litt from East Wenatchee, and Commissioner Roy Jennings from Vancouver, all virtually connected to this meeting. This afternoon, there will be no action taken. This is an opportunity to provide information regarding the Washington State Ferry Fare proposal and the upcoming fare adjustments. Once again, I want to thank you for your time today and for your patience as we work with this new technology. At this time, we will re-begin the presentation with Ray Deerdorf. Thank you for being with us, Ray.
Thank you, Commissioner Haley. The presentation I have for you today is starts with a summary of the proposal, then gets into more detail about the different aspects of the fare proposal for this year. A little bit of background first. The fare revenue requirement is a key driver of the ferry fare proposal. The legislature establishes a fare revenue target when it passes its biennial budget. And in the 2015-2017 transportation budget, there is a requirement for $357 million in fare revenue requirements. And this target was based on a March 2015 forecast scenario that assumed a 2.5% fare increase in October of 2015 and again in October of 2016. That would generate a new source of fare revenue, $8.1 million from those increased fares. So the $8.1 million in additional fare revenue is part of the $357 million that's part of the legislature's budget. The proposal summary, the change that would take effect this year, later this year on October 1st of 2015, include a 2.5% fare increase for vehicles and a 1% fare increase for passengers. The current overheight surcharge for vehicles less than 22 feet in length is eliminated. The overheight waiver currently in place for qualifying disability vehicles 22 to 30 feet long will be expanded to include any feature necessary to accommodate a disability on the vehicle that may add height, rather than the current tariff language which limits it to a lift or other mechanism. The changes that would take effect on May 1st, 2016 include a 2.5% fare increase for vehicles and a 1% fare increase for passengers. The overheight fare threshold, that is the line that delineates which is an underheight vehicle and an overheight vehicle, for vehicles 22 feet, 30 feet long, would be reduced from the current 7 feet 6 inches to 7 feet 2 inches in May of 2016. Features of this fare proposal include its consistency with policy guidance in the Washington Transportation Plan for 2035 and continues the implementation of near-term pricing strategies. It implements the projected 2.5% increase for vehicle fares, but by holding passenger fares to just 1%, also improves the vehicle to passenger fare ratio. That is the relationship between vehicle fares and passenger fares, and better aligns pricing with available capacity on most Washington State Ferries routes in the passenger cabin. A little bit about the timing element of the proposal. The Transportation Commission has previously followed the specific timing in the 2-year fare proposal. The earlier second-year increase provides additional revenue in the biennium, but can allow the limiting of the overall increase in fares for some fare categories. And this proposal uses the additional revenue to allow for a lower passenger fare increase in both 2015 and 2016. And this would be the third 2-year proposal in a row that follows the October-May timing. In 2013, the revenue from the earlier second-year increase helped fund increasing the youth discount from a 20% discount to a 50% discount. And in 2011, the revenue from the earlier second-year increase was necessary to make up for declining revenue forecasts that occurred during the economic recession. A little bit about the vehicle passenger fare ratio. This proposal increases the vehicle passenger fare ratio by raising passenger fares less than vehicle fares. And the Transportation Commission first proposed differential fare increases for passengers and vehicles back in 2013. In October of 2013, for instance, vehicle fares went up 3%, but passenger fares went up 2%. And in May 2014, the vehicle fares went up 2.5%, passenger fares 2%. And growing the gap between vehicle and passenger fares is following the Washington Transportation Plan and also joint recommendations between the ferry system and the Transportation Commission on operating and pricing strategies that are incorporated into our long-range planning. The proposal would result in 4 consecutive years where passenger fares grew marginally slower than vehicles. And these may seem like small changes, but they do add up over time. For instance, the Central Sound rate that is charged the Edmonds-Kingston route, Seattle-Bainbridge, and Seattle-Bremerton, by the end of 2016, the round-trip spread between passengers and vehicles will be 50 cents greater than it would have been if this policy had not been started back in October of 2013. It addresses different policy goals. It recognizes the higher cost of serving vehicles compared to passengers, and the fact that vehicle capacity on the system is much more constrained than passenger capacity. It provides a modest shift towards pricing that encourages walk-on and HOV customers. It incentivizes customers to arrive as passengers, and that improves overall vessel utilization and brings the passenger vehicle fare ratio closer to the peak level that was experienced in the early part of the last decade. The other major structural component to this fare proposal is the height threshold. As I've mentioned in the summary, 7'6" is where the height threshold was established back in the early 1990s. And at that time, there were only 6 vessels in the fleet that had double decks on the sides, so they were closer to 7'6" than some of the vessels that had been built or modified since, and which has resulted in the actual height limit on many vessels being between 7'0" and 7'6" in height, and that results in vehicles under 7'6" sometimes being loaded in what's called the tall space in the middle of a vessel. And the height issue has become a more significant operational concern. There are more loading challenges. Having this sort of variable height threshold provides complications to our vehicle reservation systems and other communication challenges. So the proposal is actually, since the majority of vehicles are that are affected by would be affected by a threshold change are under 22 feet in length, we simply eliminate the overheight surcharge altogether for vehicles under 22 feet. And the underheight threshold for a vehicle 22 to 30 feet in length would see the threshold drop from the current 7'6" to 7'2". The height in the fair incentive for customers to arrive at the system in vehicles that are shorter than 7'6", which was the original implementation or real initial instigation for this height surcharge back in the early 90s. Now that we have vehicle reservation systems on the San Juan Islands and Port Townsend routes, that will be utilized to mitigate any risks with scarce overheight space. And then the underheight threshold for 22 to 30 footers that drop from 7'6" to 7'2" would happen in May of 2016 to allow customers time to adjust. There's one last component to the proposal, and that is the disability height waiver. The current Washington Administrative Code for tariff we feel is too specific, in that it limits the waiver only to vehicles that have wheelchair lifts and does not cover the following situation where somebody arrives at the terminal with an overheight vehicle, but the vehicle is designed to specially accommodate the person with disability, but is not a lift or mechanism. So the proposal simply broadens the language to allow any feature to accommodate the disability. I'm going to end this presentation now and join Mr. Crocker in the other room for comments and questions.
Comment. Audience members, take a quick survey on this platform of webinar. There are 4 multiple choice questions. Now I'll engage the survey now. So please fill out the survey, and we appreciate your feedback. I'll give it 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll move on to the Q&A portion. Thank you very much. thank you for filling that out. I'm going to end the survey now, and we'll move to the question and answer portion of this Ferry Fair proposal. Please, again, we have this chat field in the bottom left-hand corner. If you have a question or comment, please type in there and submit. And I'll start with a few comments or questions we have here. So Ray, this doesn't mention anything about motorcycles, at least in the presentation. Do motorcycles rates increase at the same rate?
They would increase at the same rate as vehicles, so 2.5%.
Okay. Now, when you talked about the height reduction, does the reduction in height improve processes for Washington State Ferries? Does it produce savings? What's the benefit?
It would reduce confusion and complexity, in particular on the reservation system, where now you're presented with a variety of choices of whether you're under 7 foot 2 inches, between 7 foot 2 inches and 7 foot 6 inches in height, or 7 foot 6 or over. So this would simplify the ability to make a reservation. It would also simplify the operations at the toll booth, because some people who are under height going through the toll booth, if they're just under 7 foot 6, still have to be treated as an overheight once they get to the loading area. So this will simplify that process as well.
Okay, so it sounds like it's a benefit both for the customer when they're making reservations and the ferry system for when operating the system. Is the reservation system being considered, now again, these questions are a little bit outside the scope of the fare proposal, but is a reservation system being considered for commercial vehicles?
That's a good question, even though it's not particularly germane to this presentation. I'll go ahead and answer that. The reservation program was set up in a series of phases, and the first phase was to essentially replace the Port Townsend reservation system and the Anacortes Sydney reservation with more state-of-the-art reservations. And the second phase, which was just implemented, is to all vehicles in the San Juan Islands. A potential third phase, which we will still need to evaluate moving ahead with or not, could involve commercial reservations to other routes or our general purpose vehicle reservations to other routes. So that is yet to be determined. There's no funding to develop further reservations at this time.
I have another question, again, outside the scope of the fare proposal, but does the new transportation revenue package that just passed by the legislature, maybe you're not completely up to speed with it yet, but do you know if it provides any funding for any ferries, the ferry system, for any new terminals? Is there any benefit to the ferries?
There is funding for Coleman Dock and the Mukilteo terminal, as well as funding for a fourth new vessel. We've built 2 vessels of the Olympic class already. A third one is under construction, and the funding package, the transportation funding package, would fund a fourth vessel.
Okay, great. So again, in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen is the chat field box. If you have additional questions, I'm not seeing any at the moment, so we'll just wait a minute, see if a few more questions come in. We'll give it one more minute. I'm not seeing any questions coming through. Again, if you want to ask a question or have a comment to share with us, please type in the chat field and submit. We'll give about one more minute. So I'm not seeing more questions coming in, and while we wait, I'm going to ask Ray Deerdorf to speak to timelines and process of the remaining schedule of this Ferry Fair proposal time period. Ray?
Yes, there's one. This is the third of 4 outreach meetings that the Commission is holding. The final outreach meeting is on July 22nd in Bremerton in the evening between 6 and 8 p.m. And the Commission will make a decision on the proposal at a hearing in downtown Seattle on August 4th, and that will be between 10 a.m. and noon. And at that time, they will consider all the comments that were heard at the public outreach meetings, any that have come into the Commission, as well as any additional testimony that is heard on August 4th at the hearing.
Great. There are no other comments at this time, so I think we'll wrap up here. I'd just like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar on the Washington State Ferry Fair proposal. If you'd like further information, please visit us at our website at wstc.wa.gov. As a reminder, you'll be able to access this recorded meeting on the Commission's website on the Ferry page, along with other information. And before we close off today, I'd like to ask Chairman Ann Haley to come back on and join us and leave us with some closing remarks.
Thank you very much for joining us today for this webinar. We are rolling out this technology to enable people to join us who might not otherwise be available to come in person to a hearing regarding the Ferry Fair proposal. Again, we encourage you to post any questions on the Commission's website or direct them to Ray Deerdorf at Washington State Department of Transportation, deerdorf@washdot.wa.gov. Thank you very much for being with us today, and have a good afternoon. Goodbye.